Hey there, it's Antrese, and welcome to the Savvy Painter podcast. This episode is sponsored by Trekell Art Supplies. For over 30 years, Trekell has been obsessed with the art of brush making, and now they're applying that same obsession to professional-grade artist panels. Both their brushes and panels are made right here in California at their Hesperia factory. Go to Trekell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off your next order. My guest this week is the artist Hannah Faith Yata. Hannah studied feminism, psychology, and art in college, and she went on to graduate with a BFA in painting from the University of Georgia, and later moved to New York to put her ideas into paintings. Hannah weaves political ideas, environmental degradation, and themes of moral injustice into increasingly chaotic paintings. She uses masks from a mix of other cultures to speak to the different relationships that native tribes and cultures have with the earth, and gives anthropomorphic qualities to the animals to speak their consciousness. In this episode, Hannah and I talk about some of the opportunities she pursued in the last years of college and immediately after graduation. With no expectations and no preconceived ideas about what should or shouldn't happen, Hannah was free to explore paths that she might not have otherwise. Some of Hannah's work is controversial, which is to be expected when an artist tackles themes like politics, feminism, and the environment head-on. Hannah breaks down one of the more controversial paintings, and then we talk about the memorable responses she's had to her work. Hannah is super curious about human nature and why we behave the way we do. These are big, big topics, and Hannah digs deep into it with a curious, unblinking mind. Without further ado, here is Hannah Faith Yata. Hello, Hannah. Thank you so much for being on the Savvy Painter podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me.
It's great. I'm really excited too. Thank you.
Do you remember a painting you did when you were young that you were really proud of, that you thought like, wow, I want to do this?
Yeah, so that's kind of funny because I kind of grew up in this religion that basically they look down on you going to college or anything doing with like after school and all this stuff. So it was actually like not in my idea of my future, but I always loved painting and drawing. And my dad always gave us like these weird things. Like he always kind of believed in kind of cultivating, I guess, intelligence and creativity and talent. But anyway, so I think he gave us like some paints, and I painted this thing it was like a photograph of seals from like National Geographic when I was 11. And I was like, wow, this is actually pretty good, So I guess I always had like a knack for drawing because I was always kind of doing that in school, but I really didn't consider it a possible career path until I was really an adult.
What made you finally see it as a viable career path?
Honestly, it was meeting other painters. I think in 2011, I was still in college, and I really didn't know what I was going to do after college. This was like pretty much my last year, and I just had no idea. And I showed one of my teachers. I was like, how do you paint this way? It was a painting by like Martin Whitfoot. I was just like, how does this guy paint like this? And at that point in college, I had really not developed technically because it wasn't really a technical school. It was more like, kind of more a conceptual program of art. So you could do anything and everything and get away with it.
Where was this?
University of Georgia.
Uh-huh.
It wasn't like I'm shitting on their program, but I really wanted to learn how to develop more technically. And I think Martin just had this like beautiful imagination and technical skill that I really wanted to explore. And my teacher was like, why don't you go shoot him an email and ask if you can like do like an internship or something. And I was like, people do that? I had no idea. And so I shot him an email and ended up like working with him and Adam Miller for the summer, like a couple months. And I've been in touch with him ever since. But, I think that was the moment that I really met two artists that were extremely passionate about what they were doing and serious and showing in galleries. And I was like, wow, I can't believe people actually do this. Yeah.
It is scary when you have that moment of what you want me to talk to this person, like to ask for something. Like I remember when I first started this podcast, I was just like, how do I do this? And I started emailing people and I was like, so, what do you think if I interview you? And then when they answered, I was like, oh my God.
No, exactly. I was like, oh my God, what if
No,
they
I
don't
have to
like
do
me
this.
too? Like, what if it's really awkward? Yeah, there was a lot of unknowns and like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening. Yeah.
So how do you feel about that now? What do you like now is when it's in your rear view mirror? For people who are listening, I think sometimes we're all like exactly what you just said. Like you could actually do that.
I think at that point, like it's like I pretty much had nothing to lose at that point, like I didn't have any like really strong familial ties, so that like my dad had moved to Japan and, my mom is like, we've got a weird relationship. Anyway, it's like I had nothing expected of me. And I honestly had no idea like what to do after college, because even people that had gotten like degrees in like biology and stuff, they were just driving bread trucks and, like they had their MFA and they were still working in a restaurant. So I was like, what's the worst that could happen? It's like I haven't kind of gotten what I wanted out of college at this point, and I might as well just say, what the hell, and go for it.
Right. So what did you learn from working in those two studios? Like, I remember when I graduated from college and you're like, okay, I got all these skills, or I learned X, Y, and Z. Now what?
Yeah. My painting classes, like my teachers never really showed us demos. They were like, paint whatever you want and I'll try and help you out along the way. And that was cool. But, I really wanted to see how to process. Like I didn't even understand underpainting at that point. I was like, why the hell do you put like burnt umber on? Anyway. And I posed for Adam Miller for one of his paintings. So while he was painting me, I could see him, like putting down the paint. And I was just like, wow, you use this brush to kind of blend these colors. And why do you render it so much? And then you just kind of like, he'd soften it all up with a big brush at the end of every session. And I was like, why would you do that? It's like you just had all this detail. But I saw the painting slowly progress, and it was like, wow, this makes sense, like these glazes and this slowly building of detail and all these layers. And, like that was just something I didn't get from my teachers. And, I think that's really important, especially, when you're going for a certain way of paint building, because, I wasn't trying to just be an abstract painter. I wanted to render things. I don't know.
And were you able to sort of glean anything from them about how they run their studio or how they run their art business that was really kind of pivotal for you?
A little bit. I mean, like I guess sometimes like people just get these ideas that like they have to have this like super amazing space and they have to have all this stuff. But I guess you put these expectations on yourself and you're like, oh, I can't be a real artist until I have these things. But I think that's something realistically artists develop with time. And just seeing the way, they've grown over the years, but also like when I first started working with them, you kind of are like, wow, so you just work with what you have until, more things come along. And I think also like just talking to them, it's amazing because sometimes, just over the internet, you see people and you're like, you just feel like things are so out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to like connect with people and have like a conversation with them and work with them, you're like, wow, this is very possible, like, I don't know. I guess it just kind of makes it more understandable, and I can't really explain all the ways.
Well, it sounds like it makes it all understandable. It makes it more personal. Like it's almost like it's this mythical thing, right? This
Exactly.
like unreachable place. And then you see people who are there and you're like, wait, I could totally do that.
Yeah. I was just amazed, like, okay, it takes a lot of perseverance and guts. And, like Martin was working on one of his solo shows at that time, and he was working, from morning to late night. And I was like, I just love that, because I was like, this is what I want to do. I just want to paint full time, like this is the dream,
So what did you do after that? How did you transition from, you're working with in their studios and you get all this great information and then you're off on your own. Tell me a little bit about that.
Actually, like after I came back home, my dad was like, hey, there's a gallery in Japan if you want to visit me next month, and you can have a show here if you want. I was like, I don't have anything. But then I just locked myself in my studio because I'd just gotten back from New York and I was like on fire. I was like, I want to do this. So I spent night and day. I think I was getting like 3 or 4 hours of sleep at night and working on this show. I think I produced probably like 15 paintings, 18 paintings in like a month.
Oh my gosh. And they're pretty big too, right?
Yeah. I don't paint too small most of the time. So I brought them over to Japan and, I showed them there. I mean, they scared the crap out of the poor people that came to see my show, because it's kind of more of in Japan, it's definitely more of a repressed society. Not like, it's definitely becoming more like open now, but still, I had a couple of people that came in and like saw the show and just left immediately. But yeah, and then like after I graduated from college, I moved up to New York and I got my own like little crappy apartment in Brooklyn. And then I got another job working for another artist. And that was definitely not personal. That was just like, a regular job where you clock in and leave and they don't even know your name, but it's just for the paycheck. And from there, it's like when I got to New York, I think that was the time that, it's like I'd come home, I'd paint until like I was falling asleep, I'd wake up like 4 hours later and go to work. And then, because this was like a full daytime job. So it's like working 40 hours a week and still trying to like make my own work.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that grueling routine actually, I was so tired at that time that I painted exactly what I wanted to paint. It's like you can't put that sort of love and attention to your paintings unless you're doing something that's totally you, or else there's no way you'd have the energy to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think that was the point that I really felt that I sort of stumbled onto myself, I guess you could say that. I don't know.
I want to go back to that. I'm just curious because something like caught my ear when you were talking about that show in Japan. So you like spend a month, sounds like almost 24/7 painting.
Yeah.
And then you get all your work over to Japan. Did you say 4 people showed up?
There was more people that showed up. I mean, but I was just saying, you might have heard that there was like a couple of people that showed up and just like turned around and left because for that show, I was like really heavy on the idea of like, like nude women bodies. And then the idea of this sort of like broken mannequin with no head. And they had like these machine like features. So it was like really heavy on the eyes, like dark backgrounds and stuff like that. Yeah, it was kind of an intense show, Yeah.
But I'm curious so when for example, if I'm doing something like that where I am just full speed ahead and like obsessed with like getting this, hitting a deadline and getting something done. And then you're taking your work all the way over to Japan. So I'm sure like getting it there was a huge effort.
Yeah.
How did you feel after the show? Were you just kind of like, did you feel like, I don't want to say you were rewarded for it, but like when you're like really stressed out working on something and then it's like your brain has to kind of catch up to you. You know what I mean? Like, how did you feel like after the show? Were you just kind of like, oh my God, I did it? Or were there surprises about the show that you're just like, wow, that made it worth it?
Yeah, there was actually like a couple of my grandfather's friends, I think, came in and they were really excited about my work, which was really surprising because old school Japanese men are really not into like the idea of like this feminism stuff. And my dad was like translating my ideas into, like to them. And they were like listening with intensity, like, like, wow. And then like one of them bought like a small piece and I was like, what? Like, does he really understand what this is about? So, like, I guess at that point too, like I really probably should have considered my audience more before I did the work. But I guess I was just like so full of this like fiery idea.
Yeah.
And, like, and plus, I hadn't even graduated from college yet. So I guess that was another point that I was just like, I have to get these ideas out here, like I can become like this like idealistic woman sometimes. It's just like I have to let people know about this, this injustice. uh, yeah.
And has that changed?
I try not to be so like, this is funny. I don't really like to tell people this much, but I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, so I was like knocking on doors, like telling people about the Bible. And I try to be like aware of that sometimes because I don't want to sound preachy, like I don't want to tell people because I'm not a, Jehovah's Witness anymore. But it was like I do know that sometimes it's like you can easily get preachy about these topics.
Mm-hmm.
So gradually I've started to, try and like be more aware of that and open and like let my artwork breathe a little bit so that it's not so like browbeating in a way. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's such a delicate thing because I do get very passionate about things and it's like I really like to explore these ideas and things like that. So, as much as I love them, I know that everybody else doesn't quite read my work the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So I do get a lot of different interpretations, and I'm like, yeah, that could definitely be interpreted that way. But I guess I'm trying not to be like, I don't know. So I don't even know how to describe it. Just,
Maybe so
just
like heavy-handed or kind of
yeah,
like, yeah.
exactly.
So for people who aren't familiar with your work, can you describe it? This will be interesting after I just pushed you through that.
Okay, so lately, like I just did a show at like Corey Halford. So my work has kind of, maybe I should just kind of condense it in the last like 2 to 3 years. But my work has kind of addressed the idea of like likening the idea of the woman's body to the body of the earth and what we're doing to that or her and then also kind of bringing in animals and things like that. And it's like I kind of do these weird mutations to the animals and also to the women so that it's kind of like this strange toxicity. I feel like, okay, I don't know. It's like I'm still processing my last body of work from Corey Helfer.
Yeah, well, I think that's totally normal. It takes, like, part of creating work like this is working through your own thought processes, I think. And then there's also, like, once you create it, you're learning and you're kind of making your thoughts more solid as you're working on these pieces. So it makes sense that, even after the piece is done, you're still kind of learning from it.
Exactly. Yeah, it was like my last solo show that it was like called Dancing in Delirium. So it was like kind of this idea of this like neurosis, psychosis that's happening in our society and kind of exploring those weird psychological themes of feeling disconnected or kind of like moving in this universe, but kind of feeling that I wanted to like invoke like a sort of feeling of like helplessness or just existing in a world that's really strange and I don't know. It's kind of like with the whole like bright colors that I use, I kind of like to think of those as these like toxic splashes or this like blaring over sensory that we get from our society and like advertisements and things that were like constantly being thrown at us. Yeah, I feel like each piece kind of stands on its own in a sort of way, and it's hard to like just like talk about the whole body without like being like, but this piece is more about like this, but they connect in this way, and yeah. Yeah.
Well, is there a piece that you can take, for example, and kind of walk us through your thought processes on it?
Maybe one of the more like recent controversial ones was like this one I did. It was called Psyche, and it kind of like depicts this woman with like her legs open, and you see like full frontal vagina, but then there's like this seam that's running down her middle, and it's kind of stitched together. And I got a lot of people like, "Oh, this makes me feel really uncomfortable," and I'm like, "It's supposed to." And I guess that was like probably one of the pieces that mixed the whole idea of feminism and like the body of the woman with the idea like the body of earth and the idea that like feel like there's this kind of psychological war that's kind of going on with us in our society, and how we're like brought up to believe that we have to live a certain way with certain things, and just like the insanity of the way that we continue to try and sustain ourselves. I mean, there's a lot of different things that I feel like we're not addressing. And I feel like it's this sort of subconscious thing that I feel like I want to continue to bring out in the work. And that piece was also like, I remember listening to a talk by Eve Ensler, and she was talking about like when she got cancer, and she realized when she was going through this experience how she felt like it's like her doctors were like prodding her and poking her, and like, they were like trying to get this cancer out, but she felt like very violated. And she realized like how all of these things, and like the cancer that's like happening in the world, and how like we're taking out these things from the earth, and this sort of like disease state, how everything is so unhealthy, and the gas that's leaking in the oceans and all of this stuff. She was likening it to this cancer that was in her body. And I don't know.
Interesting. Wow.
I just get so excited about it and wanted to like combine all of these ideas into this really heavy piece. But at the same time, it's so hard to make the work accessible. So it's like you want to make it beautiful, but you also want to make it thoughtful and provoking.
This episode is sponsored by Trakell Art Supplies.
My name is Greg Crayola Simpkins. I'm an artist. I've been working with Trakell for, it feels like 12 years. I forget the exact amount, but they make the best paintbrushes.
Greg is part of Trakell's pro team. Trakell partners with certain artists to create their own line of brushes. As Greg puts it, it's kind of like a skateboarder getting their own board. It's just one piece of how Trakell works with artists to develop the best possible brushes and panels. One of the things I've been really impressed by as I've been talking to Trakell and some of the artists who use their products is how much Trakell cares about artists.
They come out to all the shows, like Courtney's at every art show, an event that we do, and they make the trek, which is really nice. They really are supportive in sponsoring projects. I just had the cover of High Fructose come out, and they put out a special series, Simpkins Brush, with all new subscribers, High Fructose. They just kind of like, oh yeah, we'll just do that. They get into the projects that we're working on too. Like, have a documentary coming out, they're going to have a little part in it. It's just, they care about the artists. It's not just like, oh, you need us. It's like, no, we all need each other.
Go to Trakell.com and use promo code SAVVY16 to get 15% off your next order. What are some of the memorable responses that you've had to your work? When people are really getting that you're creating these beautiful pieces, but they also have a very, there's a conversation that goes with them. There's a meaning behind them.
It's very wide array of responses. Like sometimes I get like angry responses of like, why are you doing this? And when I first started out, I really felt like the responses, I either got like angry responses or like, oh my God, I love your work so much, I'm crying in front of my computer right now. Which, it's like, you're like, what? I can't believe that it's hitting people that way, because I guess in a way it's like, it's very personal what you're painting about, but at the same time, it's also like, you really don't know when you're kind of putting these suggestions or symbolisms in your painting, you don't really know how people are going to take them. So I think the strongest response that I've got that I can remember, I've gotten quite a few emails. I'm just like, oh, well. But yeah, there was been a few people that are like, oh my God, I'm crying. I'm like, because I guess they had like a really personal connection with certain pieces. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would imagine they would, especially, that one that you were just talking about that was sort of about this woman who had cancer and that connection with the earth and the cancer in the earth. I'm curious too, if you don't mind talking about it, when you get these kind of angry responses to your work, like the first time that happened, for example, what did it make you sort of question what you were doing?
A little bit, not really that much. I feel like it's a strange thing, like because I'm a younger artist, I feel like putting your face out there too much, especially like when I was first starting, kind of put a target on my back in a way, like I think black mascara was one of the first paintings I did when I got to New York. And after that painting kind of came out more and more on social media, like some of the angry emails that I got after that were a little strange. But then it was like, well, I guess I hit a nerve, because that one was kind of a strong piece because it's like, this idea of like a woman and she's in this very kind of authoritative position, that you don't really tend to see, I guess, nude women depicted in, which was the point.
Right.
But, it's like, I think now it's like people see you and they're like, well, this person has like a lot of followers, and then they see my career and I've been showing places. And, now it's more like if there's people that don't like my work, they probably don't take the time to send me angry emails because they don't think that I'm going to see it.
Uh-huh.
I guess a little more protected in that way, but I still get some responses.
Yeah, it's interesting just because, I don't know, like we basically live in a world now where people feel like they can just unleash all their anger on you, like that's perfectly acceptable. I think it's part of just the internet age where if you see something you don't like, you no longer just walk on by and just go, I don't like that. You feel like you have to, or some people feel like they have to immediately express their displeasure and unleash on whoever it is that put this in front of them.
Yeah. And I also hate to say it, I also feel like it tends to be more with women, especially like I know several of my friends have these dating sites, and if they don't respond to a man because they don't like his profile or something, the man starts becoming like verbally abusive. And I know that's not all men. I'm just saying it kind of feels the same way as a young woman, and you're putting yourself out there, with your art and stuff. You get these unsolicited responses that, it's like if you don't reply to, people feel like they can pick on you for some reason. Like,
yeah,
like you kind of have, it's like they want you to defend yourself because they just want to kind of mess with you. It makes them feel good.
Yeah, I don't get it either, but but yeah, it seems to be a fact of life now, and it seems like the justification for it is, well, if you didn't want it, you shouldn't put yourself out there, which has all sorts of connotations to it, right?
That's what I'm like, I get all on fire about that.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, what are you kind of obsessed with right now?
That's hard. Right now, honestly, I'm trying to figure out human nature, but like on a societal level,
Just the small things in life.
Well, not exactly like just the small things in life, but I'm kind of in this world where, it's like I want to figure out like, or just kind of get the connections between like why we do what we do and like why it's so like complacent in our society to just, or how we got to this point really, because it's funny because we don't need all this stuff. I mean, I feel hypocritical saying that because I have so much stuff and I use it to like create the work that I do. But at the same time, I'm just like, I guess, since I moved to New York, there's so much crap everywhere and so much like advertisements and things throwing at you and things that you don't need. I'm just like, why? But also, I'm lately kind of going back and reading stuff about origins of civilization and, kind of memory and how like our instincts as humans kind of govern the way that we, I guess, live our lives now and how that's kind of used against us in certain ways, like to consume more products and things like of that nature. I guess that sounds really vague, but
yeah, can you give an example of that? Like how? Yeah, I mean, so with I don't know so well. I mean, I have a friend of mine who has a PhD in mythology and stuff. So I'm thinking like I really don't know that much about about that, but I might be comparing myself to him.
Oh no, I agree.
But yeah, what Can you give an example of a, kind of direct line from that? Like,
well, I guess that really spans over different topics, but it's funny because it's like lately I've been seeing, well, I started doing like more tribal art in the past few years, and I've seen it pick up more and more just over mainstream. And it's funny, like my sister sent me like this advertisement the other day for like these running shoes, but it was like geared towards women and like how it's like these like women are like all tough, and it had this very like tribal music going on, and they had like these very tribal like patterns on the the pants they were wearing and stuff like that. I was like, wow, it's like they're kind of catering to this idea because we all deep from history, we've all come from tribes, and it's like catering to this idea that buy our product, you're going to be, powerful.
Part of this tribe.
Yeah, part of this tribe. They're kind of like mining this. I mean, you could go into all sorts of stuff with like the idea of like security and kind of feeding off of like this human need for the tribe and all this stuff, but they're using it to kind of gear products for us, And it's not just like tribal stuff, but there's also a lot of, other subconscious things that they use. But I guess that comes out in little ways in my work. But yeah, it's so weird because it's like, it's so hard to talk about like what level I want to talk about, I guess, my work on, because
right.
There's like this kind of neurotic idea that I like to talk about it on, but then there's also this weird like, or idea that I love the idea that these tribal societies have this knowledge of the earth and plants and animals and things of that nature, but then it's kind of being used against us in all these subliminal ways. And I don't know. That's lately my
Interesting. Now it makes sense. I mean, because on the one hand, you're really connected to and exploring these ideas of tribes and how, we as humans relate to the earth and the different gender issues, not issues, but the roles that genders have in that,
yeah,
I think, and really exploring and experiencing that. And yet at the same time, which takes you back to, like early human development, right?
Yeah.
So you're looking at it from that end, but then you live in a world where you're constantly bombarded by all these other things and, buy this, buy that, and you're not good enough. So here's a product that'll make you better. Right?
Exactly. And I think there's like this magic that you kind of feel when you learn about like mythology from different cultures and things of that nature. But then it's like it's used against us. And a lot of times I think it's kind of dark because we don't know that it's kind of using us to like buy these things that we don't really need. And, like it's like we're attracted to it, but we don't know why. And
Right.
I think that's the dangerous part. It's like when you don't know like why you're being attracted to these things and how these stories are kind of catering to your subconscious. It's like, you're just kind of blindly consuming. And
yeah, it's really easy to get disconnected, I think, from who we are and our true nature. And like, I feel like there's this sort of general unease that is happening, and we try to fill it with being busy, or at least in the United States, I think we definitely have this culture. And I think Japan is similar in some ways to that, just I was having a conversation with my husband about this last night, actually, but this constant need to be productive and to be busy. And it really seeps in. And I kind of consider myself, pretty well read, and I think about these things, and I'm, like I contemplate this stuff. But, last night I was just feeling really, really down, and my husband came home and he's like, babe, you don't give yourself a break. You're constantly like, you think that if you're awake for 16 hours, that means you have to be productive for 16 hours. And, like you don't rest. And, he comes from a totally different culture. So it's, he's from Argentina, and not only that, this is his first time living in the United States. So it's been a year now that he's been here. So he's got really kind of fresh eyes for it and can really, really see things that I can't. And he's just like, you all need to just relax.
Yeah, it's the same way. Okay, so my husband is from Ecuador, and he's been in the States for, like almost like 15, 17 years.
Uh-huh.
And he's kind of the same way. He's definitely more like laid back. I mean, he's been living in New York for a while, so I guess he's kind of become acculturated to like the busy lifestyle. But yeah, he does that talk as well. It's like, you don't have to work so much. Like, no, I have to. Yeah.
Right. Or it's like this feeling that like, yeah, it's not just that. It's, I mean, because he, when when he works, he's on fire. Like he is busting his butt. I mean, it's amazing to watch him work. But then when he stops, he stops.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he, like he'll have like that, I think everybody between work and not working, you have that kind of transition period. It's almost like a detox, something. Yeah. And then you can rest. And he'll do that. And then he's totally fine. And he's enjoying what he's doing, like in the relaxation period. Like he's either like really involved in cooking and he's 100% present with his cooking, or he's just vegging out on the couch and, like watching a basketball game or whatever, but he's really into that game. Me, I'm like cooking, but I'm thinking about the 1,000 things that I need to do that I didn't do, that and can I cook this faster so that I can get back? It's an illness.
I was reading this thing the other day and was like, if it's a numbers game with the whole, especially in this society, it's kind of like, how much did you do this? How much did you sell? How many followers do you have? Like I've actually had friends that didn't get jobs because they didn't have enough followers on Facebook.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, but it's in this society, if it's all about numbers are infinite and they will never be enough, like we keep chasing this idea of more, and it's never going to be enough. And, it's just, I think, especially as like women, I think we think about things we are always proactive, and it's like, it's so easy to just always be doing like 3 jobs at once. And yeah, I think it's definitely turning into a sort of a sickness.
I think I'm definitely ill.
Yeah, same here.
It's so funny because I'll say things like, well, what if this happens or what if that happens and we have to be prepared and da. And he's like, you're solving problems that haven't even happened yet. Be here now. And I'm like, okay, I can do this.
I know. I totally feel.
It's funny because, like I catch myself and I can pull back and be present and do all that. But when, like sometimes I just get wound up and I'm there and thank God I've got somebody that sees it and pulls me back and is like, hey, chill.
Yeah. And especially as painters, I feel like, well, for me, I really have no idea when my next paycheck is going to be. Mm-hmm. So, this is my life and this is the only job I have at this point. And, you're always this is like the first year that I've been completely, free from any other job. But it is a little scary because it's like you're your own boss. So if you succeed or fail, it's always on you. But it is like, it's hard because you're always thinking about like, things in terms of numbers and what to do next. And, how am I going to plan for this? And, and then it's like, wait a second, I really just need to take a break and enjoy life and the leaves on the trees.
Yeah. The reason we're here.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it's like, I become sane again, but then I've recently been finding myself more and more. I'm like, I need to get out of the city because I really feel, it's like, because it's so competitive here. I think the energy kind of, if it gets too much into you, it's like you really start to feel a little crazy.
I was just reading something recently about how, and it comes back to the conversation I was having with my husband last night, but that your brain is sort of like a muscle and it needs to relax and it needs to go back to, to kind of have a reset button. And so, like sleep of course does that. And so hopefully we're all getting enough sleep. Like I've gotten to the point now where I've realized how critical sleep is to my creativity. And like, I can definitely tell when I'm even a half hour off on my sleep.
Yeah.
But also getting out into nature, like literally, like they're doing all these tests now on what is happening to the brain when you're living in a city like New York or whatever, and you don't get that calmness that comes with nature. Like even going to a park for, like half an hour every day is like, does something to your brain and resets it in a way that you can't get any other way. It's something about being surrounded by nature and by the greens and by all of that is just, it's like oxygen for your brain. Like it's a thing that you must have. And when you deprive yourself of that, you start to get that kind of craziness that you're describing, that just like, yeah. And it's, when you have that crazy drive, like it sounds like we both have that, like I live in the mountains. I live in the most beautiful, beautiful place. So all I really need to do is make it a habit to walk outside, to go outside and enjoy it every single day. But like, there's days when I just don't do it. And it seems ridiculous to me because it's right outside my door.
Yeah, yeah. I totally understand that. I mean, I feel like, everything is about energy. And if you if you're completely always immersed in this idea of like produce, think, and you're not surrounded by these things and you're not like kind of meditating on them as well, because it's like, when you're in the house, you're surrounded by all these man-made objects and it might be beautiful, but I think at the same time, it's also a box and it's like closing you off from like, I kind of think about it as almost like algorithms in a way. If you're always surrounded by this like same set of principles and it's like always the same, you don't really open yourself up to this other energy. And I think when I go out into nature and I enjoy nature and I let myself reset, it's never the same. It's always different. There's always like things to be explored. There's always like things underneath things. Whereas like your house is your house or like, the walls are almost always the same. And I think, there's something that happens to your brain that just gets into your subconscious and it's healing. It's very healing. Yeah.
Yeah. To switch gears a little bit, because I don't want to keep you too long. Can you describe a single habit that you strongly believe contributes to your success as an artist?
I guess part of it is this routine that I do have, that I wake up. I try to like wake up early every day and just go straight to work, have my coffee. But I don't really know how to say that because we were just talking about how unhealthy that is.
Well, I think a routine is critical. Like that's people have sometimes asked me what if there's a common thread I can see between all of the artists that I interview or that the artists that are really growing their art and doing really well. Routine seems to be critical.
I think if I'm not going to focus on the idea that I wake up and paint every day, I really encourage my friends to read, like, especially, well, like I try to read every day. And I think that's a routine that I can more say on a healthy level to kind of stimulate your brain in a way that movies and other images like don't, because it's already kind of prepackaged for you. And also, I feel like reading a book and not like just one on a tablet, it also helps like memory. You're also like coming up with images in your own mind about the material, which I feel like stimulates creativity and your thinking patterns on a completely different level than just doing it digitally or
that's why the books are always better than a movie if you're talking about fiction or something like that, because you create that world in your head.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like I get a lot of people that are like, "What drugs are you on?" Like I want to try what you're doing, and I'm like, I'm not on drugs. A lot of these images I have when I'm reading like a very compelling, writer, and these aren't like about like fiction stories. I really like to, read about like society and ethics and stuff like that. But I just get this weird imagery kind of influenced by that. It's not drug related. I mean, that's what I would tell people.
And so then a follow-up question to that would be, what book would you recommend to people who are listening?
One of my favorite books that I've read this year was The Sane Society by Eric Fromm. And that's a really amazing book. And it's not too, I think some writers you really have to read between the lines, but he's very digestible, but extremely smart. And just talking about like sort of all of these different things that have kind of made us feel distant and kind of numb as a society, and how like jobs and stuff have kind of evolved over the years, and how that's kind of made us more and more sick, I guess, spiritually and mentally.
I don't know that book, but it sounds really interesting. I'll have to add it to my list, which I actually do read my list.
That's great. Yeah. How many you can shoot me some after this?
Yeah, after I read it, I'll let you know, and then I'll shoot you some books.
That'd be awesome.
I have so many books that I really, really love, and I should put that up for people.
Ah, that would be amazing.
Awesome. We'll do like the Savvy Painter Book Club.
Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Well, Hannah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really, really enjoyed our conversation, and your paintings are just like, I think they're just so, so beautiful. And it kind of, now that you mentioned that thing about the books, I can really see it, because I remember, especially like as a kid and reading lots and lots of fiction and lots of stories about mythology and stuff, and the images that would come up in my head, I can totally see where you get it from now.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm a little abstracted by thoughts, and I'm glad it sort of resonates with you.
Yeah, no, I mean, especially like since you mentioned that particular thing, I'm like, oh my God, I totally get it now. A big thank you to Hannah for sharing her stories with us. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Go to savvypainter.com and click on the podcast link. You'll find the show notes for this episode there. So head on over and check out Hannah's paintings. They really are spectacular. You'll also find links to connect with her on social media and her website, plus all of the artists and the books that we talked about in this episode. If you've been listening to the podcast or are subscribed to the mailing list, then you know that I've been working on a very special program for you that is coming up soon. For months, I have been hard at work in my studio, building a program that will help you with painting techniques, getting your work out, finding collectors, and expanding your network. So I'm carefully designing this program to teach you the small baby steps that, when done consistently, add up to giant leaps in your studio and business. It's an ongoing membership program for artists. We will be covering painting and creativity, getting your work out, and promoting yourself, all within a supportive community. So if you want more information on this, you can put yourself on the early bird list at savvypainter.com/early bird. As I get closer to the launch date, you will be the first to know, and you will be eligible for the lowest possible price. If you want to be a part of this exclusive group, again, it's savvypainter.com/early bird. Next week, Krista Harris will be my guest. Super excited about this episode. It's another good one. Until then, this is Antrese Wood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.